Good morning, everyone. We'll start shortly. I'm just setting everything up. Yeah, Luke, if you've already done the work, then I guess you're good. It's not too difficult today at all. The work that's in the classroom is today's homework. It's going to be 1 through 31 odd on page 360. So like I briefly mentioned before, today's work really is not different from yesterday's, except that you have decimals and fractions involved. And it's really handled the same way as long as you're good with your decimal and fraction arithmetic. But no, look, it's just that and the discussion question. I would like some feedback based on how this week went, teaching-wise, learning-wise, turning assignment in-wise, things like that. So I would appreciate some feedback with that from the discussion question. But to start off today, we're probably just going to be doing a bunch of examples. And once I run out of examples in the slideshow here, I will start doing examples from the book. But it is the same stuff you've been doing earlier this week, yesterday. It just deals with fractions and decimals now. So as a reminder, let's start off with a problem that we've seen before, and that is this problem right here. I did 4/5 times x equals 12. Before we solve this, I just want to reiterate that this actually is the same thing as 4 times x divided by 5 equals 12. So if you really want to just separate your fraction like that, you can just be like, well, I'm going to multiply this side by 5 to get rid of that division. Multiply that by 5. That leaves me 4x equals 60, and then I want to divide by this 4, divide by this 4, and I get x equals, and then 60 divided by 4, whatever that turns out to be, is going to be the same as when we do it the other way. So let's get an answer for that. 60 divided by 4 gives me 15. right? So that is going to work out the same way that we do the reciprocal. So if we were to do it as a reciprocal, that's just taking it all in one chunk. Here you're multiplying by 5/4, so we're just going to divide by 5/4 and divide this side by 4/5. And when you divide by 4/5, this is going to cancel like always, and this side's going to look like 12 divided by 4/5, which is the same thing as 12 times the reciprocal, 5/4. And that's going to give you that 60/4 as well. And then x is going to be equal to your 15. So either way you do it, you're getting the same answer. It might be easier to view it as a couple steps, especially when you get into certain algebra stuff next year. This viewpoint might be nice, but really you're just multiplying by the reciprocal. So you've done things like that before. We just got to combine that with the other steps that we added in. So let's look at another example. And these are the kind of problems that you're going to start seeing today. So the next one in the slideshow is 2/3 times n minus 6 equals 22. In this case, this 2/3 you can put in parentheses if you want. The parentheses are not needed. But we're going to solve this just like we did before. We want to get n by itself, so you want to get rid of everything that's attached to n over here. We're going to do order of operations in reverse. So instead of subtracting 6, we're going to add 6 to both sides. That's a 5. Plus 6. This is going to cancel, and it's just going to leave you with that 2/3 n. And over here you have 22 plus 6, which is going to give you 28. From this point, you just multiply by the inverse of 2/3, or you divide by 2/3, because we're doing 2/3 times n. So divide by 2/3 here, and divide by 2/3 here. Just remember, when you divide by a fraction, you have to flip and multiply. This here will cancel because 2/3 divided by 2/3 is 1. N is going to equal whatever 28 times the reciprocal of this is, times 3/2 is. And again, you can picture 28 as a fraction if you put it over 1. 28 times 3/2, you can pre-cancel some things. You can reduce this a bit. 28 and 2 both share a factor of 2, so I'm going to take out half of them. That's going to be a 1, because 2 divided by 2 is 1. 28 divided by 2 gives you your 14. And then I'm going to do 14 times 3, which again, I don't mind if you use calculators at this point, because I'm trying to keep the fluid going here. Gives you 42. 1 times 1 gives you 1, and that just reduces down to 42. So n here equals 42. So yeah, it is pretty much the same stuff we were doing yesterday. You just have to deal with the fraction as opposed to a whole number now. Not too difficult, really, as long as you remember your fraction operations in arithmetic. We can do another one. Where we have a negative fraction. So here we're going to have negative 7/10 k plus 14 equals a negative 21. And again, you want to solve for k. So we want to know what our unknown is. We want to get an answer for k. So same reasoning before. We're doing order of operations in reverse, and we are trying to get k by itself. So this side here has k. It has an addition of 14. 14 can go away by subtracting it then. So I'm going to subtract 14. Be very careful with your integer operations as well. This is going to cancel. Here, negative 21 plus negative 14, the signs are the same, so you're just going to add them and keep the sign, is going to equal 4 plus 1 is 5. 2 plus 1 is 3. Gives you a negative 35. And what's left over here is your negative 7/10 and your k. So once you get that, you're going to go to your next step, which, hey, we're multiplying negative 7/10 by k, so I'm going to divide this by negative 7/10. I'm going to divide this by negative 7/10. Keeping in mind, when you divide things by fractions, you actually multiply by the reciprocal. So this number stays the same. You can write it over 1 if you need to, times the reciprocal, which is 10 over 7, keeping in mind they're both negative. You can take care of the negative sign right away, knowing that they're both negative, and you multiplying with two negative numbers, your answer is going to be positive. You can see that here. They're both negative, and you're dividing. Your answer is always going to be positive if both signs are the same. Here you can do some pre-canceling. We can take the 35 and the 7. They both share a factor of 7. So this becomes a 1, and this becomes a 5. Because 35 divided by 7 is 5, and 7 divided by 7 is 1. Then you can just multiply across. 5 times 10 gives you 50. 1 times 1 is 1. You don't need it. Therefore, k equals a positive 50. Again, it is positive because the signs are the same here. Let's start. I understand just 1 and 3 are weird. Alright, I can do 1 and 3, and then I'll get to Jason's 7 and 9. You probably hit up the distributive property on some of those. But if you would like to open up your Google Forms, your answer sheet, and you can start filling them in. We're doing odd ones. So I'm going to start with 1 and 3, and then Jason's asking for 7 and 9. I'll do 7 and 9 after that. You can fill them in as we do it. And John, the decimal ones is the same. You're just dealing with a decimal instead of a whole number. It's the same like theory behind things. If you understand how to do it with whole numbers, you should understand how to do it with decimals. You're just using a decimal number instead of a whole number. So let me look up what number 1 is. And see, we got number 1, we're looking at 1/4 x plus 3 equals 2. Again, same deal. You want to get x by itself. I'm adding 3 here, so order of operations in reverse. Subtract 3 from this side, subtract 3 from this side. Watch your integer work. This is going to cancel here, leave you with 1/4 times x. However, this is going to be 2 minus 3, which gives you a negative 1. So just watch your integer operations. After that, you're going to divide this by 1/4. You can divide this by 1/4, which is the same thing as multiplying by the reciprocal. So this becomes negative 1 times 4 over 1, which is going to give you negative 4. Again, you can think of that as a denominator of 1. Multiply your numerators, multiply denominators, you get that. This cancels, leaves you with x over here. X equals negative 4. And you can go ahead and check your work on these too by plugging them in, just like you did before. 1/4 times negative 4 plus 3 should equal 2. Well, 1/4 times negative 4 gives you negative, what is that, negative 1. And then negative 1 plus 3 is going to give you a positive 2. So it equals a negative 1. So you can check your work, and that makes sense. Number 3 deals with distribution. So don't forget your distribution we talked about yesterday. N minus 8 equals 6. So number 3 looks like this. And again, don't forget your distribution. You have to distribute the negative, or the half, to both the n and the negative 8. So when you distribute that out, you're going to get 1/2 n, because 1/2 times n is 1/2 n. And then 1/2 times -8 is the same thing as, dividing 8. Half of -8 is -4. And that equals 6. So make sure you distribute it. Once you do that, you're going to solve like we've been doing. You have get n by itself. We're subtracting 4, so add 4 to both sides, and you get half of n equals, that's a 4. 6 plus 4 gives you 10, and then you divide by a half. Divide by a half, which is the same thing as multiplying by 2. Right, so that's going to give you a 20 over there. This is going to cancel, and equals the 20. Alright, so Jack is asking, okay, so since it says it only state the first step, what would the period answer be? State the first step for each. It's going to be, hey, you're going to, what is it, subtract 3 for number 1. So number 1 says subtract 3. And number 3, you're going to distribute. That would be your first step. I just did it all out, so. What was number 1 again? Number 1. Let me move on again. I'll show you number 1 again real quick, Christian. So you got 1/4 x plus 3 equals 2. Again, it like Jack said, the directions are saying just do the first step. What is the first step you do here? Well, the first step is to get rid of that positive 3, so you're going to subtract 3 from both sides. That's really the answer, but I went ahead and solved it just because that's what you need to be able to do anyways. So here you're going to subtract 3 from both sides. This cancels, leaves you 1/4 x equals, and then again, watch your integer operations. 2 minus 3 gives you a -1. And then you just multiply by the reciprocal. So divide this by 1/4, multiply this by 4 over 1. And x is going to equal -4. Alright, next question was 7. (1/2) h minus 1 equals 3/8. What you want to do is what it's asking, like if you follow the actual directions, it's going to say what number would you multiply each side by to get an equation without the denominators. So you want to get rid of the denominators here. So one way to look at these is to just find common denominators between everything. So what is a common denominator between a 2 and an 8? Well, that would be an 8. So your answer here is 8. You're going to multiply each by 8. But let's look at what that does. So if I multiply this side by 8, I have to multiply this side by 8 as well. I'm allowed to do that just because as long as I do it to both sides, it's not going to make this equal sign false. So 1/2 times 8 is going to give me 4. And I also have to multiply this term by 8 as well. So be careful with that. This term gets multiplied by 8. So that -1 gets multiplied by 8 as well, which is just going to be a -8. And then the 3/8 is going to be multiplied by 8. And that's going to just cancel out your denominator and leave you with a 3. And then you can solve that like you were doing yesterday. Add 8 to this side, add 8 to that side. You get 4n equals 8 plus 3. 8, 9, 10, 11. Divide by 4, divide by 4. And n equals, 11/4. But your answer here is actually 8. It's asking you what to multiply by. And what you multiply by is a common denominator with all your fractions. So each term has a denominator technically. Well, we can finish this. 4 goes into 11 twice with 2 left over. No, 3 left over. So 2 3/4 is your answer. But it's gonna, the answer it's asking for is 8. 8 is what you're gonna write down. Yeah, Jason, 8's gonna be the answer. Just looking at each term individually, you have a 1/2 n, you have a -1, and you have a 3/8. What is a common denominator between all of these? So here, this actually has a 1 by 8. Your common denominator is 8. I can multiply that by 8 to get it. I can multiply that by 4 to get it. So 8 is what's going to work. For 9, yeah, your common denominator is going to be 10 for that, which isn't too difficult to pick out. 10c minus 10 equals 2/5. So again, you're picking apart each term. This term here, this term here, and this term here. You want a common denominator between all of them. And if you multiply each term by that common denominator, it gets rid of all these fractions. And here your common denominator is going to be 10. Because remember, this has a denominator of 1. Is there supposed to be decimals? There can be decimals on this one, Christian, so be aware of it. Just be careful. You can always double check things by plugging them back into the original equation and solving it out for the variable there. But here, if you multiply every term by 10, this becomes a 7. This becomes, well, 7c, sorry, this becomes a -100, and this becomes a 4. And then you can go ahead and solve that. But your answer is going to be 10. That's what it's asking for. What common denominator it is. Do you want me to do some with the decimals? I don't know how far you got. I didn't do any from the PowerPoint with the decimals. Here, you can deal with the decimals just like, you know, they're normal numbers. So just keep that in mind. So here we're going to do the same thing. You're subtracting 3.6, so add 3.6. Gives you 6, and over here you give you 1.5x. You're multiplying by 1.5x. This cancels. So divide by 1.5. Divide by 1.5. And x equals 60 divided by 15 is 4. Easy as that. Any questions from the homework you want me to go over still? Please don't forget to respond to the discussion question that's posted today. It is looking for feedback. I just still don't understand the equation with the fraction as the answer. Is there a certain number you're looking at there, John? I just want to pick one fraction as an answer. You want to do 11? 11 says 8 minus W10 equals 3/5. Want to do that one? I mean, one way to do it is just to multiply it through by a common denominator again. Yeah, okay. So one way to do it is to just multiply through by that common denominator of 10, and that will get rid of your fractions if you want, or I just deal with the fraction because it's not too difficult. And this one's going to be fairly simple once you see what's going on here. So keep in mind everything we've learned this year, because you can use proportions to solve this as well. So here we got a 8 over here, right? We're adding an 8. You see how this is a positive 8. So we're going to subtract 8 from both sides. In doing so, this is going to cancel, leave you with negative W over 10. Over here, you got to do 3/5 minus 1/8. The best you can. Find common denominators. You can use 5, so I can multiply that by 5, multiply that by 5, and I get 3/5 minus, and then that would be 40/5. 3 minus 40 gives me a negative 37, right? And denominator stays the same. Looking at it, you know they're both negative, so your answer here is going to be positive anyways. But then you can, one way to look at this is to use your proportions. I mean, you now have a fraction that's equal to another fraction. You can cross multiply this, which is how I normally look at it. Or you could just get rid of that 10 and multiply each side by 10. So we're going to times this side by the 10, times this side by the 10, and you're going to get negative W equals a negative, because again, this is negative and this is positive, so whatever your answer is, it's going to be negative. And then 37 over 5 times 10, we can write it out like that. These can pre-cancel. 1 and 5. Negative 37 times 5 gives you your negative 37 times 5, 185. Which is not right. I did something wrong there. Something's messed up. Let me double check this. I did something wrong here, John. Well, my mistake is in this. Because if I sit there and I rewrite this as a decimal, it works out. So if you write this as a decimal, you get negative 7.4. And then that times 10 is going to give you your correct answer, which is negative 74. Oh, that's because I didn't divide it by 5. I didn't finish that. So what was that? Sorry about that, Johnny. That's all right. I didn't finish that. This is going to be times 10. No, that's not making sense either. What did I do wrong? Oh, when I pre-cancel, this becomes a 1 and this becomes a 2, not a 5. I divide by 5 on each. That's what I was doing wrong. Then negative 37 times 2 gives you that negative 74. And that's your answer. Sorry about that, Johnny. Hopefully that didn't confuse you too much with my little mistake there. Is there any other questions on things? One and 3 are both negative 4. Not really. The directions say just to state the first step. If you put the answer, then I'll know you know the first step anyways. I don't remember what 3 got us. But technically the answer to number 1 is subtract each side by 3, and technically the answer to number 3 is distribute 1/2 to n and negative 8. But I mean, if you were to actually solve them, you would get negative 4 for number 1. I don't remember what you got for number 2. If I do it real quick, you're going to get 1/2 n minus 4 equals 6, 10. Now number 3 would equal 20. Uh, 13. Minus 10 equals 0.5. I'll get 19 after this one, Christian. So 13, again, we want to get c by itself. We're subtracting 10 here, so let's add 10 first off. So 0.7c equals 10.5. Don't forget to line up your decimal points and all that. This is what's canceling. And then you're just going to divide by 0.7, divide by 0.7, and c is going to equal whatever 10.5 divided by 0.7 is. 10.5 divided by 0.7 gives you 15. So c equals 15 here. Again, same thing you've been doing, we just have decimal numbers. And if you want to, you can move your decimal points out both times. I mean, that's just writing an equivalent fraction. It's times this by 10, times this by 10. And doing 105 divided by 7, which might be a little easier. You'll still get 15 though. guess I don't need that anymore. 19. Let's look at 19. This is the word problem. See what all we got here. I am not going to retype this word problem in. I'm assuming you can read it from your book. Dwayne is taking a drawing class. The drawing pencils cost and spent the total of that. It already gives you the equation, so you have to pick out the equation. You're just doing 0.97 n plus 5.95 equals 11.77. And again, one thing you can do is you can just multiply by the common denominator and just make these all whole numbers and just solve that way too. It's going to give you the same answer, but it gives it to you in decimals, so let's do it in decimals. Here we have n. We want to get n by itself. You're adding 5.95, so let's subtract it. Cancel that out. We're going to subtract 5.95. Just watch your decimal placements there. Make sure things are lining up. 7 minus 5 gives you 2. That you got to borrow for. Decimal. So you were getting 5.82. This cancels, and you're left with 0.97 n. Then you're going to divide each by 0.97. 0.97. Again, I'm just going to use a calculator for it. 5.82 divided by 0.97 gives me 6. N equals 6. This is a word problem, so there are units to it. To find the number of pencils he bought 6 pencils. So that was 19 for you, Christian. What about 27? I'm confused. Well, 15 is 6.5, right? I don't know what the answer to 15 is. 15 is 6.5, Jack. Or, yeah, Jack. 15 is 6.5. So I can do that if you want, but I'm going to do 27 first. So we can look at 27. So 27, so we have negative 1/3 times x minus 9 equals negative 1. In this case, we have that distributive property. Note the parentheses being multiplied by a number out front over addition or subtraction here. So we are going to distribute the negative 1/3. Keep in mind it is a negative 1/3, so we're going to do negative 1/3 times x, which is negative 1/3 x. And we're going to do negative 1/3 times a positive 9, which again, if you need to, you can come over here and do like, set it up like this and like pre-cancel everything, but it's going to be 3. 9 divided by 3 gives you 3. Keep in mind this is a negative and this is a negative, so this becomes a positive 3 equals negative 1. Once we got that, it is going to be your algebra. So order of operations in reverse, we're adding 3, so let's subtract 3 from both sides. Watch your integer operation here. Negative 1 minus 3 gives you negative 4 equals negative 1/3. And don't forget your variable. This is what canceled. Over here, you just divide by negative 1/3. Divide by negative 1/3. Keep in mind these are both negative, so your answer is going to be positive either way. So I'm going to just ignore the signs. I'll do it up here. 4 times the reciprocal, which is 1. You don't really need the denominator. It gives you 12. So it gives you a positive 12. By the way, most of my science will be done on Google Docs. That's fine. There are drop boxes in the classroom for you to attach them to. I prefer you to do that if you can, because it just keeps my email more organized. However, if you really have no clue how to do that, you're more than welcome to email to me. Just watch option C. I should have everything updated by Monday, and then we can talk Monday being about, hey, I turned this into you and you lost it, because my email is kind of cluttered. So if you did email me something and I didn't get to it right away, it might have been lost. So watch option C on Monday, and I will take disputes about grades on Monday and see if we can find everything. Isn't -4 positive? What's that mean? This is a negative number. This is a negative number, so my answer will be a positive number. So I just ignored my signs when I started doing it, because I already knew it was going to be positive. I already figured that out. This does give me a -4, because this is a negative plus a negative gives me an even deeper negative. The book is also saying the answer is 12. No, -1 minus 3 is a -4. Again, if you think about your number line, you have like 0, -1, -2, 3, -4. You're at -1. You're taking away 3 more. 1, 2, 3. You're at -4. Whoop. You're at -4. Well, we've been on for our 40 minutes, so if you have questions about it, please email me. Technically, Monday is a half day of classes. I'm not really sure how that translates on really to anybody, but I will probably have a shorter lesson on Monday. Maybe I'll just give you some review to do, things like that, but just keep at it, and it's going to come with practice. That's really what it's going to be. So with that, if there's any other questions, please send me an email. I'll help you out the best I can there. Keep an eye on option C. I'm not putting any more assignments in option C, so if you are missing something, you have till the end of the day to turn it into me. And from there, you want me to do 17? I can do 17 before we go. We got that. 17. 17 says x plus 2.3x negative 6.4. Not too different. This is a decimal. Not too difficult, but remember from yesterday, you can't combine like terms, so we can actually add these together before we solve. So we want to get our x's together first. So 2.3 plus 0.9 gives you 3.2. So you have 3.2x equals negative 6.4. And then you just divide by 3.2, divide by 3.2. Keep in mind that is negative, so your answer is going to be negative And then 64 divided by 32 is 2. There's that. Again, if the decimal confuses you, you can multiply each by 10, make it an equivalent fraction, and do 64 over 32, which is probably easier for you to do in your head. Anything else? For the 3 of you that are left, don't forget the discussion question, and I'm ending it there. So have a good weekend, and talk to you Monday or over the email if you need something.